Right. We'll just wait a couple minutes for any more students to join. It's just 6, so maybe till 6:05. Then
Yeah, let me know when we want to start.
Sachi, I guess we can get started now.
Sure, Nanika.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining the session. Today is the 4th day through the series, and we have Sachi from the team discussing design and architecture with you today. So I'm going to let her kind of take over. So thank you, Sachi, and over to you.
Appreciate it, Nanika. Thanks for the introduction. And just a little role reversal. I'm going to do architecture first, and then, that's going to cover a lot, and then sort of move on to design towards the end of the workshop. just quickly share screen. And before I can start, sorry, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So just before we can, get into the presentation, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Sachi. I'm an architect. I graduated from Pratt Institute about 4 years ago. And ever since, I've worked in New York and in Mumbai, and I'm currently consulting with the Red Pen. So that's just a little bit about me. So what is architecture? Like, if I can, request a few answers from our kids on the call. If not, I'll just quickly sort of give you guys the technical scientific definition of it. And then, by the end of like the next 10, 12 slides, you'll have a completely different understanding of what architecture is. But please, if anyone would like to, quickly tell me what they think architecture is, and if they're interested in studying it, so we can have it be a little bit more interactive. All right, I guess not. Okay. So what is architecture, right? By definition, technically, it's the art and science of designing and constructing buildings and other physical structures. It involves the creative process of conceptualizing, planning, and creating spaces that are functional, aesthetically appealing, and responsive to the needs of individuals and communities. So this is the definition that I thought was most befitting when I was researching this presentation. But when I think back and sort of look back at the last 8-9 years of my life, I kept questioning that, is that all architecture really is, right? And the next few slides, I'm just going to take you guys through, a bunch of really prominent architecture, and hopefully towards the end of those slides, you guys will sort of get an idea that architecture is more than just, a structure. It's more than just a building, and it's more than just a floor plan with 4 walls and a roof, right? So let's go ahead and see what. So today, in today's world, when you think of architecture, the first thing that sort of pops up in your mind are these like very, grand sort of steel and glass structures, a lot of, edificial sort of humongous magnanimous structures. But again, is that all it really is? And where did it start? There was this sort of, the history of architecture is long, and it definitely didn't look like this like 100 years ago, right? So I'm just going to take you guys through a few more slides and sort of explain to you guys like different architectural styles, and then we can sort of get into the profession of it and the career opportunities and what all we need to do to sort of get an undergraduate career in architecture. This is residential architecture. Again, these are two very prominent architects. On the left is Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright, and on the right is Villa Savoy by Mies van der Rohe. If any of y'all are sort of, vaguely interested in architecture, these names would, be sort of relevant to you guys. Again, both residential architecture, both, sort of villas and bungalows, but again, the treatment is so different, right? One is basically perched up on a cliffside and, responds to this waterfall that it's sort of built upon. Structurally, again, a very sort of, it's an engineering marvel from, it was constructed almost 80 to 90 years ago. And on the other hand, we have this sort of, planar rectangular box on stilts, which is sort of Villa Savoy by Mies van der Rohe. Again, both evoke very different feelings, especially the experiential aspect of, feeling the architecture. These are two sort of chapels. So I try to, sort of incorporate commercial, residential, exhibitional architecture, ephemeral architecture, and also sort of, museums and chapels, so that you guys sort of get an understanding of what exactly architecture is all about. Again, on the left is Villa Ronchon by Corbusier and another modern chapel. On the right, as you can see, they both are, the purpose of the building essentially is the same, but the treatment is so different, right? They both, again, evoke very different feelings. And sort of that is really the essence of architecture, right? Similarly here, this is, Sagrada Familia by Gaudi on the left, which is still being constructed. There's constant construction being done on it because of its uh, massive structural columns. And on the right is the Church of Light by Tadao Ando. If you see like the Sagrada Familia architecture is very intricate. You have all these gargoyles, you have all this sort of detailing. And on the right, it's just simple concrete planes, sort of with the porches to, bring in light into this sort of space that's supposed to be for prayer, right? Again, it's all architecture, but very different treatments, right? Um, Similarly here, right, we have the Giza pyramids on the left, and we have sort of the memorial to the Jews by Daniel Lipskin on the right. They're both memorials, but again, the treatment is so different. The sort of ethos that you're supposed to sort of feel when you see these is sort of, memorializing the lost sort of pharaohs on the left, and then again the Jews on the right. Again, rough concrete, and then you have sort of brick on the left. So it's the treatment is very different. The purpose is the same, right? And I'll get to a little bit more of that towards the end of these slides. These are two just happen to be Guggenheim museums. It wasn't intentional on my part, but again, you'll see it's like this beautiful circular spiral structure, which is the Guggenheim in New York on the left, and then that's Frank Gehry's sort of Bilbao, the Guggenheim in Bilbao on the right. Um, Almost seems sculptural, both the pieces, but then again, aesthetically, experientially, they're so different. Also, if you see the structure on the right, Frank Gehry's sort of literally the way he designs is he uses tissue paper and sort of cardboard, and he sort of plays with it and designs sculpture and then sort of translates that into architecture. So you see also very different processes that architects follow. A little bit about landscape architecture here. These are both sort of, pretty modern parks in New York. The one on the left is the Highline, if you guys are familiar with it. Again, architectural marvel. It sort of, goes all the way from downtown Manhattan to almost 50th to 60th Street on New York. And it's basically this raised parkway that sort of, goes along the west side of New York. On the right, it's basically an entire island that's on these sort of, a vertical stilts at different heights, and that's called Little Island in New York. Again, sort of encompassing, the difference in the treatment of even sort of landscape architecture. This is a concept in architecture that was sort of a little bit more modern. It's called biomimicry, where sort of architects use, nature as their sort of inspiration. So on the left, we have sort of the Aqua Tower by Jeannie Yang in Chicago. And then we have the Seed Pavilion by Thomas Heatherwick on the right. Again, when you look at it at first glance, it's more art than, it's more sculptural than architecture. But then again, there's form and there's function. So there's the aesthetic side of it and also the functionality that's embodied within these structures. Again, from when we started on the first slide, we were talking about, these modern sort of steel and glass structures. And now towards this slide, like the entire landscape is different, right? We're looking at something that's, in architecture, we call this ephemeral architecture, which is transient architecture. They're not permanent sort of structures. They're like more pavilion sort of temporary structures for a particular purpose, and then they're dismantled. So as you can see, like the play on color, lighting, sort of tensile structures, the use of, site context, the use of actually sort of, on the left, it's basically sort of a bathhouse that was constructed for the Burning Man Festival in California. And just the use of lighting and sort of, they've sort of thought of the natural fog that sort of emanates at around that time, and then how lighting can sort of create this experiential value. Similarly, the Serpentine Pavilion in London on the right. So it's a lot more than just creating structures that serve a certain function. Similarly here, this is just experiential architecture. It's just sort of these strings that are created at different levels in a color gradient, and it's just a piece of sculpture that's actually architecture and meant to be sort of experienced while walking through it, right? Again, these are pavilions. Almost always this is like, again, comes under ephemeral architecture because it's not permanent. But then again, this doesn't really serve a purpose other than just being experiential. So this too is architecture, right? So at the end of it, like when I started off with sort of the technical definition of it towards now, so exactly like the question is, what is architecture? And I wish someone, when I studied was getting interested into architecture, actually sort of really broke it down and explained to me that architecture was more than just designing, drawing, and sort of creating buildings and plans and sections and elevations. So this is something that I wrote, and I really do believe in this. And as an architect, if any of you guys eventually end up studying architecture and becoming architects, you will develop your own sort of definition for it, and that's really important for you to know what architecture means to you, because it's so much more than the conventional sort of meaning of it. So I'll just quickly read out what I thought. Architecture for me is everything. It can be art, a political statement, a social statement, a functional space, a feeling, an object of beauty or ugliness, a haven, a language. But at its core, what is it, right? For me, it's a human experience. Today, when we sit to design, it's all about how the person who's going to occupy a certain space sort of emotes with it, or the experience that they have through it. So it does not really exist as architecture without taking into consideration the human experience. And what's really important then is that it's up to the architect to sort of determine the sensations that the inhabitant will experience through a particular piece of architecture, or a space that you're designing. And it's up to us to sort of determine the meaning of that architecture, and it's up to us to sort of understand the emotional response that the work is going to generate in people. So really, that for me is architecture. And like I said, you guys, will learn so much more and sort of create your own definitions for it. But I hope that the sort of conventional jargon that's associated with architecture is sort of a bit obscured right now and has a little bit more meaning. All right, so we get to, sorry, for some reason, yeah. So again, now I'm going to, get a little bit into what the actual architectural design process is. Today, if you sort of, set up an architectural project and you're working with a client on a particular sort of site, right? There's a very distinct sort of process that's followed in the profession, right? The phases are as follows. We have the pre-design phase, wherein you're sort of, identifying and documenting the goal and what the client really wants from the project. You're programming spaces. You're sort of, putting down objectives, needs, and the client's requirements. And that's a really important sort of phase, because you're sort of, really identifying what the client wants, and you're sort of setting that in stone so that you can move on to the next phase, which is the schematic design phase. Here is where you're sort of, it's again a preliminary design phase wherein you're, focusing on the conceptual, spatial, and the technical design, right? Thereafter is your design development phase. Again, a very in-depth, detailed design is produced in this phase. This is when you're actually, setting pen to paper, creating your plans, your sections, your elevations. And sort of, this is the phase in which, you will be finalizing all the design changes that have sort of emanated through the last 3 phases, right? And then once all of that is sort of finalized and set in stone, you'll sort of, get into the construction document phase and the contract document phase, which is again really important. Also exceptionally boring. This is a phase of in the process that I absolutely hate, but again, it's very, very important because this is when you're, transforming your design drawings to sort of actual construction documents, and these documents are detailed such that when you sort of give those drawings to a contractor or a construction manager, they're able to execute the plan to perfection, which is why it's such an important phase. And then again, sort of, the architect's responsibility starts to diminish after this phase, because then it's the implementation and construction administration, which basically just involves overseeing and sort of ensuring that the plans are followed to the T, and sort of, figuring out any issues that come about, or any sort of construction delays, etc., due to various sort of on-site issues, right? So that's the architectural design process. Again, in today's world, technology is super important in architecture, and it has a profound impact on the way we design, the way we create, and the way we construct, right? If you guys don't know this already, 3D modeling is at the forefront in the architectural field today. We have various parametric modeling softwares like Rhinoceros, which sort of gives you the flexibility to, design very organic spaces, very experiential sort of designs that were not able that we were not able to sort of do 100 years ago, because we did not have this technology at our disposal, right? We also use computational softwares today. We use Python, we use Grasshopper and Ladybug. All of these softwares sort of enable us to design and analyze very intricate forms, and sort of optimize structural performance and simulate environmental factors. Something that, that you will realize early on in your architectural education is the importance of site analysis and environmental factors. And that's something that's sort of understood and designed for in the first 3 phases that I mentioned in the earlier slide. Again, building information modeling, it's something that, going into architecture school, it's really important to know today. When I studied like about 8-9 years ago, it was just at the point where, BIM was becoming sort of well known, at least in India, and it was pretty much established in America. Softwares like Revit, basically, it just helps you sort of, collaborate with your engineers, and in your entire sort of design of your building is in 3D and in 2D in one software. And it has sort of plugins for your structural engineer, for your civil engineer, for your mechanical engineer, etc., right? Your MEP, and everything sort of integrated. So you basically have this virtual 3D model of the entire building. And it basically just allows the architects, contracts, and engineers involved in the construction process to collaborate and share information on a single platform. What this does is, and again, a very important part in the way we, design and practice architecture today, because it also sort of helps us optimize on, quantities, on sort of, glitches that could come about during construction. So it really helps you value engineer the project and save time, money, and effort, right? Virtual reality has sort of been used in architecture, at least to my knowledge, for the past 15 to 20 years. It really is, I know today we have sort of, we have the Oculus, we have all of those sort of VR capabilities to, game and sort of, play sports, etc. But in the architectural environment, it really enables, you to put on this big VR headset and sort of actually navigate the 3D models so that you feel that you're within the space. And it really gives a client a very immersive experience. Robotics and automation, again, is something that's big in architecture today and important to know about, because it really sort of, streamlines the construction process, improves efficiency and precision. We have a few other technologies that I've not mentioned. But again, the last one that I did want to sort of, just put in here so that you guys have an idea about prefabrication, modular construction, and 3D printing. Just to, expedite construction timelines, cost saving, etc. Prefabrication and modular construction is very big in today's architecture world. So I just wanted to sort of, show you guys the potential of all that technology. On the left, we have one of the first, 3D printed sort of steel bridges in Amsterdam. And if you're in college in architecture, you're going to be, by your third or fourth, you're actually 3D printing models. So it's actually really cool. You'll be, using the laser cutting, you'll be using sort of the robotics studio, etc., and CNC, and sort of all of these, beautiful technological advancements that probably someone who studied architecture 50 years ago did not have the access to. On the right, you would see an entire sort of pavilion being constructed by a robotics arm. So all that sort of software integrated with the robotics arm, and it sort of automates the entire construction process. Okay, so here's, a little bit of understanding the architectural undergraduate landscape, right? Again, the way the architecture sort of program is built is threefold, in the sense that you have the opportunity to, actually design and develop projects through your through every semester. You also have a lot of theory classes, and you also have a lot of sort of external electives that you can take, like psychology, etc., and basically sustainability classes or other minors. And I'll get a little bit more into that. Again, just a little heads up, this is more relevant to the US versus the UK. And I can sort of address a little bit about the UK in our Q&A session, but let me just take you guys through this. So the design, planning, and management of your built environment, and your built environment is your architecture, are tools for addressing critical issues of our time, from social justice to climate crisis. As a student of the School of Architecture, you would build skills and knowledge that you need to respond to these complex and evolving challenges in a uniquely versatile, innovative, and ethical way. So it goes beyond a lot more than just, designing cool buildings or aesthetically pleasing spaces. It sort of, the practice and sort of the thought process that goes into actually designing something takes into context, the environmental factors, the social factors, the climate crisis, right? These are things that you're going to learn about and be very conscious of through the course of your study and your career. So what are the typical courses, right? Really quickly, the Bachelor of Architecture, which is the 5-year course, it's a professional degree, and it focuses again on architectural design, the technology aspect of it, building science, construction methods, and theory. This is the Bachelor of Architecture. Considering it's a 5-year course, it also incorporates a thesis here, and which means that once you sort of graduate, you do not need to sort of cap your education off with a master's, right? It sort of automatically prepares you to sort of get onto the licensing path, especially in the US. In India, once you sort of got a BR from an accredited institution in the US, and we can talk about this a little bit later, you sort of are automatically licensed in India as long as you submit your transcripts and your grades for your 5 years, right? A lot of practical hands-on work, a lot of, actual designing with your hands. You're going to be creating models, you're going to be, creating hand drawings, you're going to be creating architectural drawings on Rhino or AutoCAD, right? The BSc and the BA are slightly different. The BSc in architecture is again a pre-professional degree. It only lasts 4 years, which means you do not cap the program with your thesis project. And it basically just provides a good foundation in architectural studies. You're learning a lot of the technical and the theoretical aspects of it. but it still doesn't fulfill the requirements for sort of entering the licensure process, right? And have, like, considering you've taken a 4-year course, you would have to sort of cap it with a master's degree after, which almost always, at least in the US, ends up being a 2 to 3-year course. So your sort of education sort of gets extended to 8 years. The BA in architecture, again, similar to the BSc, but again, focuses a lot more on architectural studies, the history of architecture, liberal arts, sort of design theory, and humanities. So it's a little bit more liberal arts centric. And it's ideal for someone who's really not interested in pursuing a licensure in architecture and sort of wants to, get into one of the other professions that you could, another career pathway that you could take besides being a licensed architect, right? Again, this is something that's really important and things that we don't know about, which I feel that, I was lucky enough to know this when I was planning my education 10 years ago. There's the NAB accreditation board in the US, which is the National Architectural Accrediting Board, and there's the RIBA in the UK. Every time you sort of, go through a program and you're doing your college research, it's really important to sort of ensure that your US program is NAB accredited and that your UK program is RIBA accredited, right? What happens is that, it just sort of gives you that comfort that your sort of program, whether it's at a tier 1 college or at a tier 3 college, still meets the standards of educational quality and the requirements that are required to sort of, probably get into licensure eventually. If you don't go to a NAB accredited sort of program, and you would like to get into the licensure process to be an architect in the US eventually, then that sort of 4-year degree means nothing, right? And that's just a complete waste of time, effort, and money. Similarly, in the UK, the RIBA is a RIBA Part 1 and a RIBA Part 2. The undergraduate program is Part 1, and then to sort of cap it off, you would have to do a master's to get your RIBA Part 2 in the UK. Right. So again, similarly in Europe, in Singapore, and anywhere else that you might choose to study, it's really important to research the accreditation status of the institution that you're applying to, and make sure that the program is recognized by, the relevant national accreditation bodies. Similarly, and I was sort of alluding to this a little bit before when we were talking about BARC, in India, it's really important to sort of ensure that your college is on the Council of Architects list, which is available online. That sort of just ensures that automatically, once you graduate from a particular program, you get licensed in India. However, licensing in America is completely different. And if you guys, have more questions about that, we can address that in the Q&A. Okay. Again, something that, I have kids that at the Red Pen who are sort of doing, applying for undergraduate architecture, and they have absolutely no idea what the actual architecture curriculum entails, right? So and this is again more BARC focused, because versus the BSc and the BA, I almost always recommend that my students do the BARC. It sort of saves you the effort of doing a master's in architecture. You could, eventually do an MBA, or you could do a master's in a field like data analytics, etc., so to sort of, have this a very strong education, as opposed to, doing 8 years in just purely architecture, right? So having said that, the course is sort of divided into 3 categories. You have the core classes, which are required in architectural study, and you have liberal arts courses that are also mandatory, and electives, which are classes that you can choose within the School of Architecture, as well as sort of all institute courses. So say you go to, University of Michigan, and you go to Taubman School of Architecture, and you're doing the BARC program there. You have the opportunity to, by the 4th and 5th year, to sort of select electives within the School of Architecture. But you also have sort of an additional 12 to 18 credits, and that again is school-based, to sort of take classes outside the School of Architecture. You could take classes in the School of Business, you could take classes in the College of Arts and Sciences, you could take classes at the Liberal Arts School, right? Again, so the flexibility that you get is to sort of curate your own sort of career pathway and educational pathway towards the last 2 years of your education. I'll just quickly take you guys through the core courses. Okay, sorry, there's a mistake in my spelling here. The main part of any architecture 5-year degree or 4-year degree for that matter is the architecture design studio. This is where you're actually, spending two days of the week, which is like a 4-hour sort of design studio where you have one-on-one time with, a design professor. You're either, talking to them and sort of discussing your project, understanding fundamental design concepts, learning how to draw in the first year, sort of learning how to understand concepts of scale, space, how a human body sort of fits within a particular environment, how the body responds to a particular space. You're learning basically fundamental concepts of design. You're learning how to sort of communicate graphically and represent your drawings correctly. So that's your design studio. Year on year, of course, it gets more and more advanced. Towards the 3rd year, you'll be designing a complete building or a sort of project. You'll be designing anywhere from a boathouse to a dormitory. And these are just examples. Of course, every school has its own sort of process and its own sort of curriculum. But basically, these are sort of the classes. You'll again have architectural history, which is really important because you'll be learning about all the different architectural styles. You have building technology, architectural drawing and representation, which is again a really important part of being able to present your work. You could have the best design, but if you can't sort of extrapolate drawings or sort of renderings, then that design really doesn't mean anything when you have like a critique with 12 jurors and you're sort of presenting on a pin-up wall your entire sort of project, right? Then you, of course, environmental systems and sustainability is an important class. Urban design and planning, structures. This is where you sort of really, understand statics, you understand structural design principles, analysis principles. You learn about steel, you learn about concrete, how to sort of, understand tensile structures, understand compression. So that's a little bit more of the technical side of architecture. You also, by the 3rd year, learn a class called professional practice. This is where you sort of, get into understanding the business of architecture. You understand the legal, the ethical side of it, and sort of, really understand what it would mean to set up your own practice. Again, digital design and visualization. This is where you sort of use rendering softwares, etc., to really, represent your design. Elective courses are, again, completely sort of different from your core courses, where your core courses are going to, ensure that you understand architecture and are able to practice eventually. Your elective courses are, very sort of, they're sort of based on how you want to proceed in your career, what your goals are and what your ambitions are. If I, for instance, want to study sort of, parametric or computational architecture, right? Which sort of involves learning all of these sort of algorithmic based softwares. I'm going to take classes in sort of, Grasshopper, Python, etc., right? So these are sort of your electives. Say I want to study, sustainability or do a minor in sustainability. I'm going to be able to pick my professional elective classes within the School of Architecture in sustainability. Similarly, you have sort of restoration and renovation as a minor. You have construction management as a minor. You have various different sort of, if you don't want to do a minor, or if you don't want sort of a concentration, you can take different sort of, electives and chart your own sort of education, right? Again, that's within the School of Architecture. You're also going to be able to do electives in other courses that are, again, like I mentioned before, in different schools, right? You could take, I, for instance, took 4 psychology classes through my 5 years at Pratt, because I do believe that, it's important to know understand people if you're designing for people, right? So stuff like that. You could take a class in, for example, at Pratt, you could take a class in conspiracy theories. So that's sort of, the other electives that you can take in the liberal arts section. Again, like I said, you're sort of creating and charting your own individual curriculum towards the end of this in the last 2 years. And this is the benefit, again, of the US versus the UK. As you guys can already tell, I'm a bit biased towards the US, but of course, the UK also has some great programs and some great colleges that we can discuss later. Again, a little bit of, just a graphical representation of what goes on in the first 2 years. You're literally just learning how to understand volumes, forms, spaces, sort of, deconstruct them, learn how to draw, understand sections, elevations, etc. So this is the sort of work that you're going to be doing in the first 2 years. A lot of, as you can see, importance on representation, right? The use of color, the use of texture, the use of shadows, sort of, understand the importance of line weights and stuff like that. I think, again, I'm going to into it, so I'll just move on. And then again, like, this is your first 2 years, right? This is what the last 2 years of your sort of progression of work's going to look like. That's actually a thesis project. One of my friend's thesis projects, actually, in your 5th year, you're actually designing sort of a different way of constructing, right? This was architecture for Venice, right? That was the thesis project, of course, involves inventing or innovating something. And then again, you have on the right, which is like a complete sort of site render of a project that a student, sort of a multi-use project that incorporates housing, theater, and a research center, right? So that's the sort of progress you're going to make in the 5 years, right? You're going to come out, absolutely sure of what architecture means to you and how to design in different contexts, and for different sort of, programs, and employ sort of technology, sustainability, etc. Again, something that's really important to know early on, is architecture really for you, right? Do you enjoy art, design, envisioning spaces, creating sort of, 3D models? Do you enjoy Lego growing up? Again, problem solving and spatial reasoning are 2 really important parts of architecture. If that's something that you're good at, there's almost always going to be a problem that's, waiting for you, whether it's when you're building your first semester model out of wood and cardboard, or whether it's when you're designing a logistics development complex for Amazon at work, right? So it's problem solving is the core of architecture, right? Again, you really need to be someone who, really likes to learn new things, because it's an ever evolving industry. I learned Rhinoceros 10 years ago. Today, there's, completely different and new softwares that are already being sort of developed, right? And if I want to stay in the game, I need to sort of be updated on those things, right? So exploring new technologies, working in teams is really important, because almost always after your 3rd year, from your 3rd year to your 5th year onwards, you're going to be working in teams. And it's a lot more difficult than it actually sounds, because you're sort of designing with someone else and sort of, arguing and debating and sort of constructively putting together a project with someone else. What should you do now? And like, this is really important when we have students come to us to sort of build their profile. Academically, you need to ensure that you have a good math grade, or you have some sort of, background in visual art. If you're doing the IB, I would recommend taking visual art. If you're doing sort of CBSE, I would recommend taking design. Physics, even though conventionally, is thought that it's a prerequisite for architecture, it's not for most colleges in the US. The UK, considering it's a little bit more conventional, I would suggest having it at least till the 10th, if not 12th. Definitely don't drop science until the 10th. Again, English proficiency, strong communication skills are really important, because almost every sort of assessment in your 5 years is a presentation. And it just, sort of goes to show that you need to be able to communicate very strongly. Extracurriculars are a very, very, very important part, and I can't stress this more. Your portfolio is basically a reflection of who you are as a designer and an artist. Having said that, it's not important to sort of have, Zaha Hadid level work as a 16 or a 17-year-old. They don't want to see, fancy sort of models or, beautiful art. They want to see thoughtful, conceptual sort of work. So the more sort of depth a piece of artwork has, that's more sort of, promising in an architectural or an art or design portfolio, right? You need to sort of demonstrate skill and conceptual thinking. Those are the two most important sort of aspects of your portfolio. I almost always suggest and ensure that my students do an internship. This not only goes towards demonstrated interest, and I'm sure your counselors have sort of explained to you what demonstrated interest is, but it also sort of gives you a real world perspective of the profession. Sitting in an architect's office, sort of, as an intern, building those architectural models is going to give you a real good idea and sort of a skill set, moving into college. Summer programs are not necessary, but again, considering that, similarly for business and economics, you have the opportunities to sort of do those classes in your 11th and 12th. We don't have, architecture or sort of any sort of courses that we have the opportunity to take in any of our programs, really. So I do recommend an Intro to Architecture summer course. It gives you a strong foundation, and sort of you get a glimpse into what your first few years in architecture school are going to look like, right? And again, it goes towards showing demonstrated interest. Good leadership skills and ability to work in teams. Again, this can be demonstrated through your ECAs, through any sort of, team leadership. In school, if you've been a sports captain, if you've been sort of a head of the school council or any sort of organization within the school, right? Again, you really just need to be able to demonstrate good communication and presentation skills. So if you've taken part in MUNs or debates, that's good to highlight on your Common App activity section. And your postal statement if you're applying to the UK. Career prospects are actually vast, and these are the ones that were at the top of my head. If you're not, like, it's a very versatile profession. If you're an architect, the 5 years of rigor in architectural school is going to really gear you up and give you a strong will more than anything else, because you're really going to be put through the ringer every day of those 5 years. And not only that, you're going to come out with a very strong skill set in, different softwares, in sort of designing, in articulating, in presentation, etc. Right? So you have, of course, architect, architectural designer. Now, those two do differ. If you guys want, I can sort of get into that a little later. Your urban planner, urban designer, you can sort of get into landscape architecture, interior architecture, interior design. You can become a lighting consultant or a lighting architect. As bizarre as that sounds, that is one of the most highly paying professions within architecture. Restoration and renovation architecture, you can become a construction project manager. You sort of do a minor on that. You can become a sustainability consultant, a facade consultant, a furniture designer, a BIM specialist. Again, if you all want to know more, please ask me in the Q&A, because I can just go on and on. It's just such a vast topic. You can become a visualization specialist if towards the 5 years you realize that you're really sort of interested in the softwares and the renderings and sort of, the representation aspect. You can become a visualization specialist, and also one of the most lucrative sort of professions under architecture at this present moment. A historic preservation specialist, a little bit more, again, niche, but very possible. You can get into academia, research, graphic design skills are sort of, part of the entire 5-year package. So that's on the table. Communications design. You're sort of actually through the course of 5 years going to learn how to, render on different softwares. And a lot of them are actually used to for gaming design, etc. So you can become a gaming designer, set designer, or an exhibition designer, right? So that's architecture, and I'm going to conclude with other careers in design. Again, I know that probably a lot of you guys want to know a little bit more about each of these, and I'm happy to answer that in the Q&A. But I feel like once you've sort of understood architecture, which is the most complex of the design fields today, the rest sort of fall within a subset of the way architecture is taught, of course, minus the technical and the engineering aspect of architecture, right? So we have graphic design, we have UI UX design. I'll get a little bit into UI UX, the rest are a little bit self-explanatory. So UI UX design is basically user interface and user experience design focused on creating, very intuitive, interactive and visually appealing interfaces for apps, websites, mobiles, games. They consider using, again, behavior. You conduct a lot of research through this and design interactions to sort of enhance your user satisfaction and usability. We have fashion designing, industrial and product designing. We can again get a little bit more into this because I see that we're already at 6:50. We have event designing, we have multimedia design. We have, again, a little bit, sort of professions that are not very commonplace, but again, are highly lucrative in the design world. You can become a design strategist, which involves working at the intersection of design and business, right? So this would really, if you end up going to a university that allows you to take electives in the business school, this is something that you can plan for even before you start your education, right? And it really just involves developing strategies that leverage your design thinking and your sort of innovative strategies that you use in design to solve complex problems. You can become a motion graphics designer and create sort of animations. Something I haven't touched upon, a lot of the times through architecture, you're always looking for the best way to sort of represent your project and to sort of give that 3D animated feel. You're going to learn how to, use After Effects and other sort of animation softwares like Lumion, etc. A service designer, again, can get into that if you want a little bit later. Experience designing, this is again, you're crafting your end-to-end user experiences across multiple touch points that you're, incorporating elements of UX, which is user experience, service design, and interaction design, right? Again, you can become an exhibition curator or an art curator. You can become a design educator and a design consultant. Again, like the last and the first, like the design strategist and the design consultant today are actually highly paid individuals in the design field, right? And then again, we can get into that if anyone of you all are more interested in that. Thanks, Nanika, and the rest of you guys for staying. I'm sorry if I, rambled on and went a little bit too into detail with the architecture part. So please tell me if I can answer any questions or, recap any of the other slides.
Thank you so much, Sachi. This was great and very in-depth and kind of gave us a really good understanding of architecture and design. Any questions, anyone?
I feel like when there are no questions, a lot of the stuff
has been covered.
And no, has not been explained well enough. So or just been ignored.
No, I think we've covered a lot. Thank you everyone for joining. We will be sharing a recording of today's session as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to kind of email us and your lead consultant can get Sachi involved on a call as well if you have any specific questions just for her. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sachi.
Thanks, Anika. Bye. See you
Bye.
guys.